Well, I'm here with Alan Minster of Frontline Advisors, and we had a conversation, Alan, about why it's so important to have a well thought through, a well engineered, as you put it, a well engineered sales process. Mm-hmm. The fact is that things get really messy and expensive. You have missed opportunities if you're just doing things randomly, just a lot of reasons why. But here's the question. How do you engineer a sales process that really works for you?
Yes. I almost think of it, Steve, like a recipe.
All right.
I can go online right now and I can buy Mrs. Fields' recipe for killer chocolate chip cookies for about $5.
Yum.
And if I follow her recipe, I can predictably turn out world-class chocolate chip cookies.
Sure.
Or I can mess around in my kitchen, waste a whole lot of chocolate and ingredients, and turn out randomly poor cookies.
That would happen in my house, I'm sure.
Well, that's really what we're doing when we're talking about designing a sales process. We use an 8-step process, and it starts with defining the territory.
All right.
What's a territory into which you sell?
All right.
Selecting the prospects within that territory that fit the profile of somebody you want to do business with.
All right.
Building a database of the people that within that territory fit the profile and making that a corporate asset.
Okay.
Systematically introducing the company and the salesperson in a thought-out way.
All right.
That's not random.
Okay.
Engaging the salesperson with prospects that are sales ready and making sure that they stay focused on those people.
Okay.
Nurturing prospects that are not sales ready but they are qualified. They're just not ready to change.
Okay.
Staying in touch with existing clients in a systematic way, and then have a matrix in there that allows us to refine the model and turn up the volume on what's working and stop doing what's not. That 8-step process allows us the ability to really manage the territory and to produce predictable results.
Let's unpack that. You went through that 8-step process pretty quickly. Let's unpack that, starting with step number 1.
Okay.
Tell us what that is again, and in a nutshell, what's that about?
Defining the territory means where do you want to focus your sales effort? And that can either be geographic, it can be vertical markets, or it can be assigned accounts.
Okay.
That is a management decision that's made in conjunction with their sales team that says, we're not getting to get in an airplane and fly to Minneapolis if our territory is St. Louis.
Sure, sure. So that's step one.
Number 1.
Step number 2, what is that?
Define the prospect, or really define what the prospect looks like. If you had a magic wand and you could create the ideal prospect within the territory that fit the profile for somebody that is predisposed to buying what you sell, whether it's size of the company, number of employees, you know they're in an industry that has these certain problems that you can address, but then really define that. The thing that comes out of that is you find out really quickly as you take those territory and step number 2, which is define the prospect, there are a limited number of prospects within any territory that fit the profile for someone you want to do business with.
And I think from what I've heard you talk about in the past, having that definition kind of clears the fog and raises productivity for salespeople.
It gives focus to the salespeople.
Yeah.
Why are you spending all the time chasing this small deal when that's not even a targeted prospect for us?
Right. Tell us about step number 3. What is that and what's that all about?
Step number 3 is to build the database of people that you've determined, and don't trust it to notes and to people's iPhones and all the stuff, because I've found in working with companies, information is not lacking. Information is everywhere. The problem is it's strung out all over everywhere. We want a central repository that is controlled by the company, that they manage, and the salesperson can engage with that, but we don't want to turn our salespeople into expensive data entry clerks, which is what happens a lot of times when people buy CRM solutions.
So it needs to be well organized, accessible, and portable when you lose a salesperson.
Yeah.
So those are the first 3 steps. Tell us, what's step number 4?
Step number 4 is to take each of those individuals that are within the territory that fit the profile and systematically introduce them to both the company and the salesperson who is responsible for that account.
Okay.
We have found that a combination of phone calls, direct mail, email, laid out in a systematic way with the content already determined, not by the salesperson, because the last thing you want them to do is sit down and try to come up with an engaging letter. We want them out in the territory selling. So we introduce the salesperson, but we don't do a mass mailing and hope for 0.5%. We focus that, and every one of those contacts is followed up with a call from the salesperson to determine where they are in their buying cycle.
So there's that integrated process there that's handled both by some back office function and with the salesperson.
It's the handoff. In other words, what the salesperson does, which brings us to the next step, is once the salesperson is introduced and they do the follow-up phone call with the prospect, they have only one task, and that is to determine where that prospect is in their buying cycle. If they're determined to be qualified, but they are currently disinterested, or they're currently interested, the salesperson engages.
Yes.
Stays engaged until one of two things happen, yes, or one of three things happen, yes, no, and not now.
Okay.
If they say yes, of course, that goes into another path. If
Sure.
they say, yes, I'm interested in engaging, then they stay with them. If they say not now, then it takes us to the sixth step, which is to systematically nurture prospects who are not ready right now,
Yes.
but are still qualified. Because we know that most sales are made after 8 to 10 contacts. Most salespeople quit after 2. They
Sure.
have to, Steve.
They feel like their head's banging against the wall, and so rather than it just falling into a black hole, what you're talking about with this step is that it goes back to a place where you can continue to nurture that person so
Sure.
they don't just get lost.
They don't get lost, because once you get the fact that there's only so many people in any territory that fit the profile that can buy what you sell, to have this slip through the cracks is extraordinarily expensive.
Yes. Yes.
Especially if they've responded to an ad or they've responded to a marketing piece
That you've already spent money on.
that you've already spent money on.
Right.
That's exactly right.
So I think that brings us to step number 7. Is that right?
It is. And that is where you have a systematic process to stay in touch with existing clients, to make sure you never hear,
Yeah.
gee, I didn't know you guys sold that. You want to
Okay,
cross-market all
right.
the stuff you have to sell. We also want to ask for referrals in some sort of systematic way, and we also want to never give them the feeling that we don't care. I mean, salespeople stack rank their accounts by revenue potential, A, B, C, D,
Sure.
E. Spend all kinds of time with the A's and B's, but the question is, what about the C, D's, and E's? We don't want to lose them, so we stay in touch with them.
That makes sense. And then that brings us to
Step 8.
step 8.
And that is really by looking at what's working statistically, turn the volume up on what is working and stop doing what's not.
That makes a lot of sense.
But if you don't know, if you don't have a
Right,
process, if you treat this like it's random, which so many companies do, fewer than 20% of all companies, including very sophisticated ones, have a systematic process for nurturing, for staying in contact. And so they have all these people that respond to their marketing, or they're qualified, but they're not interested. They simply slip through the cracks. And I really believe, and we've had this
Yeah.
conversation before, you could get wealthy in most companies from just stuff that's slipping through the cracks.
Right, right. Alan, that makes so much sense. I have a couple of ideas in my head about people that really need to know what you have to offer. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. Thank you, Steve.